Welcome back to the second video on RDA for non-cataloger. In this video we're going to look at 3 of the new fields that implementing RDA has introduced to our MARC records. Seeing as we already have a number of RDA records for electronic resources in our catalog, you may have actually seen evidence of these new fields already. So we'll start by looking at one of our catalog records. So let's have a look at this ebook record from our catalog. It's a typical record. Recall that I had mentioned before that RDA makes the GMD in records obsolete. However, in this record, the GMD is still present since our library will be retaining it for the next 3 years or until we're prepared to convert more fully to RDA coding. Notice that I have circled the text electronic resource. This is what we call the GMD, and that is what can be eliminated in the future. If we look at the remainder of the record, we can see why eliminating the GMD will be possible. Unfortunately, our OPAC doesn't display the new fields that RDA creates very well in their records, but you will be able to get the idea of the intent of the new fields once we discuss this a bit more. First of all, notice just above the second box that you will see a description of the item that says one online resource. Normally, we might expect to see a description that might say something like XXI, 130p, 12 centimeters, something like that. While most library employees understand what that sort of description means, it's not all that meaningful for our users. The description, one online resource, is a description that our users will find useful, and it does seem to be in line with RDA concepts. However, this description is not actually due to RDA, but to what is called Provider Neutral Guidelines for Electronic Resources, which is a new descriptive standard which is gradually being implemented for ebooks. It's separate from RDA. In this case, the only description that is common to all versions of this ebook from all vendors is that it is a single electronic resource. So that is what we find in the description field. That is what makes it provider neutral. With HTML format ebooks, for example, there are no pages to count, so we don't include a page count. And some have argued that with PDF ebooks, all pages are essentially illustrations, so we don't indicate it that the resource is illustrated. The provider neutral guidelines remain controversial, and I'm not planning on doing a lot of talking on this topic, but I do want to illustrate that not all changes to MARC records that you may notice today or in upcoming years are due to RDA. There are other standard changes being implemented simultaneously, and more that will be upcoming. And sometimes the changes you see in the records are those changes due to our RDA, and some are not. So that is part of the purpose of this training, is to also help you continually make sense of what you're seeing in the records as they develop. So let's move down through the record and have a look at the section of text that's inside that second box. The first 3 fields in the box are new fields that RDA is quite well known for adding. There is no official term for these new fields, but many catalogers refer to them as the carrier fields. Essentially what these fields do is define what sort of resource is stored on what sort of media and in what format. In this case, we can see that it is a textual document which has been stored on a computer, and it is in the format of an electronic resource. The final field is also a field that is quite often used in RDA records. It is supposed to give additional information about the format of the resource. There are a few key points to discuss with regard to what you see on this screen. The first is that I stress the point that our current OPAC was not designed with RDA in mind. The impact of this is that these fields do not display in a suitable fashion. This may actually be confusing to our users. Concerns about how RDA fields display in older style OPACs are common in libraries. In new discovery layers such as our usearch, these fields are used for searching and may be displayed as facets or options for limiting. However, until or unless the older style OPACs are upgraded, we will not be able to make use of these fields in our traditional catalogs. The second key point is that terminology used in these fields come from what is called a controlled vocabulary. This means that if a cataloger is going to add one of these new fields, he or she must pick from a set list. The words behind the terms such as RDA content and RDA media indicate which controlled vocabulary was used. So in the first case, the cataloger picked the term in the field from the RDA content list, since that field is intended to store information about the actual format of the content in the resource, which in this case is a textual document. The user shouldn't really see this information and wouldn't see it in a catalog, which was designed specifically for RDA. The third point I'd like to make is that with the inclusion of the new fields, we can see that the GMD is no longer necessary. All the GMD tells us is that this is a record for an electronic resource. We don't know if it's a streaming video or streaming audio file. We don't know if it's a website or if it's an ebook or any of a dozen other types of electronic resources we might catalog. By looking at the new fields, we have a much clearer idea that this is an ebook because we see that it is a textual resource and it is accessed from an online location via a computer. However, it may come to mind that there are other types of electronic resources which would also fit this description, in addition to ebooks, and you are quite right if you have noticed that. There are still other standards and guidelines that can be used to identify this resource specifically as an ebook. So there is yet another option being developed for catalogers to use when creating metadata which will more specifically identify the nature of a resource. The big picture of why these fields are included in RDA, as well as why they will be more helpful in the future, is clearer if RDA is examined from a theoretical point of view. The in-person classes will address those issues, and I encourage you to attend one of those classes if you wish to understand these reasons. So now that we can have a look at the same record in the MARC view, let's look a little more closely at some different things. I've put a box around those famous new RDA fields, and they are the 336, 337, and 338. Notice that they look pretty much the same in the MARC record as when we were looking at them in the regular view in the OPAC. There probably isn't too much for me to tell you about them at this point. But while I do have the MARC record view open, let's have a look a bit further down the record to see a field numbered 655. This is what's called a genre term or genre heading. It's the type of subject heading which has to do with the genre or type of work being cataloged. The terms put into this field come from a controlled vocabulary, so there's a limited number of possibilities or options to choose from. While this isn't an entirely new way to indicate that this item is an ebook, it is one of the ways that has been experimented with in recent years, but not the only way. One of the key issues is that an ebook really isn't a genre. Thus, it's questionable if this is the correct way to indicate that an item is an ebook. There are a few key points about the 655, and the first is that it is not part of RDA. The second is that it's not used consistently and thus not reliable for doing searches. And the third is that it's something that is currently under revision. So this is another example of where you are likely to continue to see changes in MARC records, and those changes are not the result of RDA.